The alarm tore through my sleep before my eyes even opened. Red light spun across the ceiling of my quarters, and the floor trembled under a distant impact. I was on my feet before I finished thinking, pulling my boots on while the ship-wide speaker barked the same words over and over. Unidentified vessels entering orbit. All personnel to stations. This is not a drill. My name is Daniel Hart, and 3 seconds after waking up, I was already running. The corridor outside my quarters was narrow metal, painted a dull gray that had chipped from years of boots scraping past it. Outpost Solace was not a proud name. It was the kind of name someone chose for a place they wanted to forget existed. Sitting alone at the far edge of charted space, surrounded by nothing but dust and cold light from stars too distant to matter, it was the sort of posting that made other soldiers laugh when they heard where I was stationed. A joke assignment, they called it. A retirement home with guns. They were wrong, but nobody outside a very short list of names was supposed to know that. I reached the command corridor at a full sprint, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from old instinct kicking in before my mind had caught up. Lucy Bennett was already there, hair still messy from sleep, tapping through data on a wall screen so fast her fingers blurred. "Talk to me," I said. "3 ships," she said. "Big ones. They dropped out of transit 30 seconds ago. No warning beacon, no attempt at contact. Sensors say weapons are already charging. Position? Right on top of us." I felt the floor shudder again, harder this time, and somewhere below decks, a structural alarm added its shriek to the chaos. Outpost Solace was old. It looked like scrap from the outside, a leftover shell nobody wanted, patched together with mismatched plating and antennas that looked like they belonged in a museum. That was exactly the point. Nobody was supposed to look twice at it. "They think we're empty," I said, mostly to myself. Lucy glanced at me, and I saw the same understanding pass behind her eyes. Whoever was up there, whatever they were, they had chosen us because their scans told them this outpost was nothing. A relay station, a leftover, not worth real firepower, not worth real caution. They were about to learn otherwise. "Get Grant and Turner to the lower deck," I said. "Full readiness. Nobody moves until I give the order." She didn't argue. She didn't ask questions. That was the difference between people who belonged on Outpost Solace and everyone else in the fleet. Every single person stationed here had earned their place through years nobody talked about, missions that were sealed under classifications most officers never even heard of. We were not garrison troops left to rot. We were the ones nobody was allowed to know still existed. The lights flickered as another impact rocked the outer hull. Not a direct hit, I realized, still just testing fire, the kind of opening shot meant to see if anyone would shoot back. I keyed the internal comm. "All stations, this is Hart. Hold position. Let them come closer." Oliver Grant's voice crackled back immediately, calm as ever despite the chaos. "You want us to just sit here while they shoot at us?" "I want them to think it's working," I said. There was a pause, then a short laugh. "Copy that." I moved through the corridor toward the observation deck, boots hitting metal in a rhythm I had memorized years ago, on posts far worse than this one. Around me, the outpost that looked abandoned to any outside eye was quietly transforming. Panels that seemed decorative slid open to reveal targeting arrays. Bulkheads that looked structural were actually reinforced weapon housings. None of it showed on the outside. None of it showed on any scan that wasn't looking exactly the right way, at exactly the right frequency. We had spent years making sure of that. I thought back, just for a moment, to the day I arrived at Outpost Solace. Command had handed me the transfer papers with an apology in their eyes, as if sending me here was a quiet insult. I remembered reading the file and realizing it was the opposite. This was not a place where careers went to end. It was a place built for the handful of us who had already done the kind of work that never gets written into official records. We trained here in silence, refined tactics that would never appear in any manual, and waited for a day nobody truly believed would come. That day had arrived faster than any of us expected. On the main display, I finally got a clear look at what was bearing down on us. 3 vessels, each one easily 5 times the size of our entire outpost, their hulls a strange color that shifted slightly depending on the angle, like oil on water. Advanced technology, confident design, the kind of ships built by someone who expected every fight to be short and one-sided. "Grace, do we have a read on them yet?" I asked. Grace Turner answered from the secondary station without looking up. "Working on it. Their transmissions are encrypted, but I'm getting fragments. Whoever they are, they're not shy about talking to each other. I think they believe we can't understand a word of it. Keep listening." Another shudder ran through the outpost, stronger this time, close enough that dust drifted down from a ceiling vent. Somewhere behind me, Henry Walsh muttered something about paint jobs and structural integrity, and despite everything, I almost smiled. Gallows humor was practically a second language among people like us. "They're moving into a tighter formation," Grace said. "I think they're preparing for a landing party." That confirmed it. They weren't planning to destroy the outpost from orbit. They wanted to take it. Whatever database or scan had flagged this place, it had told them there was something here worth capturing intact, not obliterating from a distance. Maybe old equipment, maybe supplies. Maybe just an easy prize to add to a growing list of conquests. They had no idea what waited for them. "Let them land," I said. "Full stealth discipline until my signal. I want them relaxed. I want them confident." Nobody questioned it. Nobody needed to. Every person on this outpost had trained for years to become exactly the kind of soldier who could hold still under pressure, who could let an enemy walk closer and closer without flinching, because the moment to act would come, and when it did, it would matter more than any second spent panicking. I turned to the window, staring out at those 3 enormous ships drifting closer, their weapons glinting faintly in the starlight. Somewhere on those decks, beings I had never seen before were preparing to descend on what they thought was an easy, forgotten outpost at the edge of nowhere. They believed they had found weakness. Instead, they had found us. I keyed the comm one final time before the ships began their descent, my voice steady despite the tightening feeling in my chest, a feeling that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. "Everyone to positions," I said. "Let's show them why nobody was supposed to know we're here." The first landing pods, detached from the lead vessel, streaking down through the thin atmosphere toward the outpost's outer perimeter, trailing thin lines of fire behind them. I watched them fall, calm settling over me the way it always did, right before everything happened at once. Whoever they were, they had made a mistake choosing this place, and I intended to make sure they understood exactly how big a mistake it was. The landing pods hit the outer perimeter with a dull thud that echoed through the whole structure, and for a moment, nothing happened at all. I stood at the observation window, watching steam rise off scorched metal where the pods had touched down, waiting to see what would step out of them. The hatches opened slowly, almost lazily, as if whoever was inside had no reason to hurry. The first figures to emerge were tall, moving with a strange gliding walk that covered ground faster than it looked like it should. Their armor had a matte, dark finish that seemed to swallow the outpost exterior lighting rather than reflect it. I counted 12 of them stepping out of the first pod alone, weapons held loosely, almost casually, the way soldiers carry themselves when they expect no resistance at all. "Grace, talk to me," I said quietly. "They're spreading into a standard search pattern," she said. "No urgency. They're treating this like a supply run, not an assault." That told me everything I needed to know about how little respect they had for this place. I keyed the internal comm again, my voice low. "Nobody engages until they're inside the perimeter. Let them believe they're walking into an empty building." Henry Walsh's voice came back, steady despite the tension. "They're going to regret that walk." I almost smiled again, but I kept my focus on the screen, watching as more figures dropped from the second and third pods, gathering into small groups, moving toward the main entrance of the outpost with the kind of confidence that only comes from a long history of easy victories. Whatever species this was, They had clearly done this before, somewhere else, to someone else, and it had gone well enough that they had stopped bothering to be careful. Lucy Bennett appeared at my side, a tablet in her hand showing a live feed from hidden sensors along the corridor. "They're through the outer door," she said. "No resistance so far. They think it's working." "Let them keep thinking that," I said. "Position everyone according to the plan we drilled last winter. Nobody breaks formation." We had run this exact scenario more times than I could count, not because we expected an alien fleet specifically, but because Outpost Solace existed to prepare for exactly this kind of surprise. Every corridor had been designed with defense in mind, narrow enough to control movement, angled enough to create natural choke points, filled with hidden systems that looked like nothing more than old maintenance panels. The first group of intruders moved deeper into the outpost, their footsteps echoing oddly against the metal floor, sensors on their armor sweeping left and right as they searched for anything resembling a threat. From the hidden camera feed, I watched one of them pause near an old supply crate, tilting its head in what might have been curiosity, before moving on. They had no idea we were watching every step. "They're approaching the junction point," Lucy said. That was the spot we had chosen months ago during routine drills, a narrow intersection deep enough inside the outpost that any confrontation there would be entirely on our terms. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, not fear, just readiness, the same feeling I had carried through every serious mission of my career. "Everyone hold," I said. "Wait for my mark." The intruders reached the junction, several of them fanning out to check side corridors, while the rest continued forward. For a long moment, the outpost was utterly silent, except for the soft hum of hidden systems powering up behind the walls. "Mark," I said. The response was immediate and controlled. Panels along the corridor walls slid open, and defensive systems that had been dormant for years activated in perfect synchronization. Bright light flooded the corridor, momentarily overwhelming their optical sensors, and in that instant of confusion, our people moved. Oliver Grant led from the left side passage, calm and precise, directing his small team to secure the junction without wasted movement. Grace Turner covered from an elevated position we had built specifically for this kind of situation, watching for anyone attempting to break away from the group. I moved with the second team, following the plan we had rehearsed until it became instinct rather than thought. The intruders reacted quickly, I had to admit that much. Whatever their species was, they were clearly trained fighters, not simple foot soldiers sent in without preparation. But surprise and unfamiliar terrain worked against them at every turn. They had expected an empty outpost, and instead found themselves boxed into a corridor built specifically to strip away every advantage they thought they had. Within moments, the confrontation shifted entirely in our favor. The intruders that had been so confident walking through our halls now found themselves confused, disoriented, cut off from clear communication with their ships above. I watched several of them attempt to retreat back toward the entrance, only to find that route sealed off by systems triggered the moment they crossed the threshold. "First group secured," Oliver reported, his voice steady over the comm. "No casualties on our side." "Second group is falling back toward the pods," Grace added. "They're trying to signal their ships." "Let them try," I said. "Grace, can you jam that signal?" "Already on it." The static hiss that followed told me everything I needed to know. Whatever message those retreating intruders had been trying to send back to their vessels overhead, it was going nowhere. For the first time since the alarm had woken me, I allowed myself a small breath of satisfaction. Not victory yet, not even close, but the first sign that our preparation had been worth every long year we spent maintaining this quiet, forgotten place. Lucy moved beside me again, tablet glowing with updated readings. "Their main ships are reacting," she said. "I'm seeing increased activity in orbit. I think they've noticed something's wrong." "How long until they respond?" "Hard to say. If this was truly meant to be an easy operation, they might not have a large reserve force ready, but if they do send more, it won't take long." I turned back to the corridor feed, watching as our teams began securing the remaining intruders, disabling their equipment, separating them from any means of communication with the ships above. It was methodical work, careful and controlled, exactly the kind of operation this unit had trained endlessly to execute. One of the captured intruders struggled against restraint, its strange vocalizations translating through our systems into fragmented, garbled words. Grace crouched near it, studying the translation output with the same calm focus she brought to everything. "It's saying something about coordinates," she said. "I think it's confused about why this location isn't what their scans indicated." "Keep it talking," I said. "Every word helps us understand what we're dealing with." Henry Walsh appeared from the side corridor, a faint scrape along his sleeve, the only sign of the brief scuffle he had been part of. "That was almost too easy," he said, though his tone carried the practiced caution of someone who had learned the hard way never to assume anything. "They walked in expecting nothing," I said. "We gave them exactly what they expected, until it wasn't." Above us, unseen, but felt through subtle vibrations in the outpost structure, I knew the three massive vessels were still holding position, likely trying to make sense of the silence from their landing party. Whatever confidence had brought them here in the first place was about to be tested in a way they clearly hadn't anticipated. "Command link is still down," Lucy said. "Nothing getting through, not from us, not from them." "Good," I said. "Let's keep it that way as long as we can." I moved through the corridor myself, checking on each team as they finished securing the intruders, making sure everyone remained alert despite the apparent success. Years of experience had taught me that the moment right after things go well is often the most dangerous, the moment when people relax just enough to miss the next threat forming. Near the entrance, Oliver had gathered several disabled pieces of alien equipment, laying them out for study. "Their weapons are advanced," he said, holding up a strange device that pulsed faintly with residual energy, "but not unfamiliar. I think we can adapt some of this if we need to." "Do it quietly," I said. "I want options ready before their ships decide to respond." Grace looked up from her translation work. The captured intruder had gone silent, either from exhaustion or simple resignation. "I think they're starting to understand this wasn't the operation they expected," she said. "There's something in the tone, confusion, maybe even concern." "They should be concerned," I said. Outside, through the reinforced viewport at the end of the corridor, I could see the faint glow of the alien ships, still hanging in orbit, patient and enormous, waiting for word from a landing party that would never report back the way they expected. Whatever plans they had made for this quiet, forgotten outpost, those plans had just collided with a truth they were only beginning to understand. We were not what their scans had promised them, and their real test had not even begun. We moved the captured equipment and the restrained intruders into the lower storage hold, a thick-walled room originally built for supply crates, but reinforced years ago for exactly this kind of situation. Grace stayed close to the group, running her translation systems continuously, gathering every fragment of language she could pull from their scattered communications. I stood near the doorway, watching the readings scroll past on her tablet, waiting for something useful to surface. "I'm getting more consistent patterns now," she said. "Their language structure is complex, but the system is adapting quickly. Give me a few more minutes, and I should have something closer to a real translation instead of fragments." "Take the time you need," I said. "We have a little breathing room, for now." Lucy appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, her expression tight with concentration. "Orbital ships are still holding position," she said. "No sign of another wave yet. But I'm picking up increased signal traffic between the three vessels. They're talking to each other a lot more than they were an hour ago." "They know something's wrong," I said. "They know their landing party went quiet," she said. "Whether they know why yet, that's a different question." I thought about that for a moment, considering the layout of the outpost, the systems we had in place, and the small window of time we likely had before whoever commanded those ships decided to act. Confidence like theirs did not disappear after a single failed operation. If anything, it usually hardened into something more dangerous, a refusal to accept that the easy victory they expected had slipped away. Grace, how long until you can get something solid from our guest here? I asked, nodding toward the restrained intruder still sitting quietly against the far wall, its posture rigid, clearly aware it was being studied. Almost there, she said. The translation engine just locked onto a stronger pattern. Give me one more minute. I used that minute to walk the length of the storage hold, checking on the other intruders we had separated into smaller groups, each one restrained but otherwise unharmed. Whatever they were, whatever they had done elsewhere before arriving at Outpost Solace, my priority now was information, not retribution. Understanding what we were truly facing mattered more than anything else in this moment. Got it, Grace finally said, straightening up from her work. I can run a live translation now. It won't be perfect, but it should be close enough to understand. Do it, I said. She activated the small speaker attached to her tablet and pointed it toward the intruder closest to her. A string of sharp, clipped sounds came from the creature, and a moment later, the translation software rendered it into halting, choppy words that still carried enough meaning to understand. This location was marked as undefended, the translated voice said. Records indicated abandoned outpost, minimal value, no significant resistance expected. Ask it who gave that assessment, I said. Grace relayed the question, and after a pause, the intruder responded again, its translated words carrying a strange edge that might have been frustration, or perhaps something closer to disbelief. Central Command, it said. Scanning data from approach confirmed low activity. Confirmed minimal defense systems. This does not match observed reality. I exchanged a glance with Grace. They really believed this place was nothing, I said quietly. That was the entire point, she replied. You built this outpost to look exactly that way. It worked exactly as intended, just against an audience nobody expected. Henry Walsh, standing near the doorway with his arms crossed, let out a low breath. Guess their scanners aren't as advanced as their ships, he said. Or maybe their scanners are exactly as advanced as they need to be, I said. And we simply built this place well enough to fool them completely. The intruder spoke again without prompting, this time, its translated voice carrying something that almost sounded like a warning. Additional forces will arrive, it said. Command will not accept this outcome without further investigation. How many additional forces? I asked. Grace relayed the question, but the intruder remained silent this time, either unwilling or unable to answer. I didn't push further. We had enough information to work with, and pressing too hard for details we might not get would only waste time we needed elsewhere. Lucy, status on the orbital ships, I said, turning toward her. She checked her tablet again, brow furrowed, still holding position, but that signal traffic between them has increased even more. I think they're coordinating something. A response, I said. Most likely. I turned back toward the group, thinking through everything we now understood. Whatever database or scanning system had flagged Outpost Solace as an easy target, it had clearly not accounted for what this place truly was. That mistake had already cost them their first landing party, but mistakes like that rarely went unchallenged for long, especially not from a force confident enough to approach without any real caution in the first place. They're going to send more, I said, mostly to myself. And this time, they won't underestimate us the same way. Unless we make sure they still do, Oliver said, stepping into the doorway with a faint, knowing look on his face. I considered that for a moment. Explain. They think this outpost has minimal defense, he said. Their first wave found out otherwise, but their command hasn't confirmed that firsthand. If we can keep that uncertainty alive a little longer, maybe we can shape how their next move plays out. It was a good instinct, the kind that came from years of training in situations exactly like this one. If their command still believed, even partially, that Outpost Solace was a minor target that had simply gotten lucky, they might send a moderate force rather than an overwhelming one. That difference could matter enormously. Grace, can we send anything back up to their ships? Anything that might reinforce the idea that we're a small, disorganized group who got lucky rather than a trained unit, I asked. She considered it. I could try feeding a distorted signal through their own communication frequency, she said, something that suggests confusion and limited resources on our end, rather than coordination. Do it, I said. Keep it subtle. If they suspect it's a trick, it will only make them more determined. While Grace worked on that, I moved through the rest of the outpost, checking each of my people, making sure everyone remained ready, despite the momentary calm. Henry had taken position near the main entrance again, watching the exterior cameras for any sign of new activity. Oliver worked alongside a small team, adapting some of the captured alien technology into something we might be able to use if the situation escalated further. Lucy stayed close to the central monitoring station, tracking every subtle shift in the orbital ships above. There's definitely a lot of activity happening up there, she said as I approached. I think they're preparing something, but I can't tell exactly what yet. Keep watching, I said. Every second of warning matters. Time passed slowly after that, the kind of tense, quiet stretch that always followed a first engagement, filled with uncertainty about what would come next. I used that time to think through every possible scenario, running through contingency after contingency in my mind, the same way I had trained myself to do for years before ever arriving at this outpost. Whatever this alien species was, they had clearly built a reputation for taking what they wanted without significant resistance. Their confidence, their casual approach to what should have been a careful operation, told me they had faced very little real opposition in their history. That made them dangerous in one sense, used to easy victories, but it also made them vulnerable in another. They had no experience dealing with an enemy who refused to behave the way their data predicted. "I'm picking up movement," Lucy said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "One of the ships is repositioning." "Just one?" I asked. "Just one, for now. The other two are holding steady." That was useful information. If they were sending a smaller, more cautious force to investigate, rather than an overwhelming assault, it meant our attempt to maintain uncertainty about our true capabilities might have worked, at least partially. "Grace, anything from the signal you sent?" "Hard to say for certain," she said, "but their communication traffic did shift right after I sent it. Whether that means anything, I can't be sure yet." I nodded, turning back toward the viewport, where the faint shape of that repositioning ship became visible against the dark backdrop of space. Whatever was coming next, we had bought ourselves valuable time to prepare, time we intended to use fully. "Everyone listen up," I said over the comm, my voice carrying through every corridor of the outpost. "They're sending something our way. We don't know exactly what yet, but we know they still don't fully understand what they're dealing with. That advantage won't last forever, so we use it while we have it." Oliver's voice came back immediately. "Equipment's ready on our end. Whatever they bring, we'll be ready for it." "Same here," Henry added. "Perimeters locked down tight." I looked around at the quiet, careful preparation happening throughout the outpost, every person moving with calm precision instead of panic, and felt a familiar surge of confidence settle over me. Whatever happened next, we were not the easy target their scans had promised them. The ship above continued its slow repositioning, drawing closer to a direct approach vector toward the outpost, and I watched it with steady focus, already running through every possible response we might need. Whatever they intended to send our way, we would meet it with the same careful preparation that had defined every part of this unit's long, quiet existence. They had come here expecting nothing. They were about to discover exactly how wrong that assumption truly was. The second wave arrived faster than I expected. A single dropship broke away from the repositioned vessel, descending through the thin atmosphere with far more caution than the first landing pods had shown. This time there was no lazy confidence in the approach, no casual disregard for the possibility of resistance. Whatever their command had pieced together from the silence of their first team, it was enough to make them careful. "They're coming in slower this time," Lucy said, watching the descent on the main display. "Definitely more cautious than before." "Numbers?" I asked. "Looks like a smaller force, maybe 20, concentrated in one dropship instead of spread across multiple pods." That told me something important. Whoever was directing this operation from above had decided against sending an overwhelming force immediately, likely still holding on to some belief that whatever went wrong with the first team was a fluke rather than a genuine coordinated defense. That belief was exactly what we needed them to hold on to for as long as possible. "Everyone to positions," I said over the comm, my voice steady despite the rising tension in my chest. "Same plan as before. Let them come in believing they still have the advantage." Oliver's voice crackled back immediately. "Copy that. Teams in position." Henry followed just as quickly. "Perimeter secured. Ready when you are." I moved toward the observation deck again, watching the dropship touch down near the same entrance the first pods had used. This time, the figures that emerged moved with noticeably more discipline, weapons raised, formations tight, clearly briefed on the possibility of resistance even if they didn't fully understand what kind of resistance they were about to face. "They're definitely more prepared," Grace said, studying the feed alongside me. "Better formation, better spacing. Whatever briefing they got, it made a difference." "It won't be enough," I said. I meant it, not out of arrogance, but out of simple confidence built from years of experience. A more cautious approach from an enemy who still fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with was still an approach built on flawed assumptions. They believed they were facing a small, disorganized group that had gotten lucky. They had no idea they were walking into a unit that had spent years perfecting exactly this kind of controlled, deliberate defense. The intruders moved through the entrance with careful, measured steps, sweeping each section of corridor before advancing further, clearly wary of another ambush at the same junction point as before. I watched with quiet satisfaction as they deliberately avoided that same corridor, choosing an alternate route instead. "They're taking the East Passage," Lucy said, "avoiding the junction completely." "Good," I said. "That means they still think their first team simply walked into a trap, not that we control every part of this outpost." The East Passage was narrower than the main junction, lined with additional hidden systems we had installed specifically because it represented one of several possible routes an enemy might take if they tried to avoid an obvious ambush point. We had planned for exactly this kind of caution. "Grace, keep monitoring their communications," I said. "I want to know the moment they suspect something's wrong." "Understood." The intruders continued their careful advance, weapons raised, movements deliberate and controlled, clearly a more experienced group than the first team we had encountered. I respected that, even as I watched them walk deeper into a corridor built specifically to eliminate every advantage careful movement might otherwise provide. "They're approaching the secondary junction," Oliver reported quietly. "Hold until my mark," I said. The tension in the outpost grew thicker with every passing second, the kind of quiet, controlled anticipation that came from years of training rather than raw instinct. I watched the feed closely, waiting for the exact moment when the intruders would be fully committed to the narrow passage, unable to retreat quickly even if they realized something was wrong. "Mark," I said. Once again, hidden systems activated in perfect synchronization, disorienting the group just long enough for our teams to move. This time, the intruders reacted more quickly than the first group had, clearly better trained and more prepared for sudden resistance. But better preparation only meant they lasted slightly longer against overwhelming positional advantage, not that the outcome changed in any meaningful way. "They're trying to regroup," Grace said, watching the feed, "but they're boxed in on both sides." "Keep them contained," I said. "No need for anything beyond controlling the situation." Oliver's team moved with practiced precision, systematically isolating small clusters of intruders, cutting off any attempt to consolidate into a stronger defensive position. Henry covered from an elevated position we had built specifically for this kind of scenario, ensuring nobody attempted to break away toward the entrance. Within a relatively short amount of time, the second wave found itself in the same position as the first, contained, disarmed, and separated from any meaningful communication with the ships above. "Second group secured," Oliver reported. "No serious injuries on our side." I allowed myself a small breath of relief. though I knew better than to consider this over. 2 failed waves would not simply be dismissed by whatever command structure had sent them here in the first place. If anything, this confirmed exactly the kind of resistance they had feared, and confirmation like that tended to provoke a much larger, much more serious response. "Lucy, what's happening with the remaining ships?" I asked. She checked her readings quickly, her expression tightening. "Definitely more activity now," she said. "I think they've confirmed their second team went silent too. The other 2 ships are repositioning, and I'm seeing power signatures I haven't picked up before." "Bigger response coming," I said. "Almost certainly." I moved through the corridor again, checking on the newly restrained intruders, gathering whatever additional information Grace could extract from their communications. Whatever calm, deliberate approach had brought this second wave down had clearly failed just as thoroughly as the first, and now whoever commanded those ships above would be forced to make a much more significant decision. "I want everyone rested and resupplied as quickly as possible," I said over the comm. "Whatever comes next, it likely won't be small." Grace approached, tablet in hand, her expression thoughtful. "I managed to pull a little more from their communications," she said. "It sounds like their command structure operates through a rotating hierarchy. Whoever's in charge right now is under pressure to explain 2 failed operations." "That's useful," I said. "Pressure like that often leads to overconfidence rather than careful planning. Or it leads to overwhelming force," Henry said, stepping into the conversation. "Sometimes when people in charge feel embarrassed, they stop being careful and just throw everything they have at the problem." I considered that, knowing he wasn't wrong. Either possibility was plausible, and preparing for the worst of the 2 seemed like the only responsible choice. "Let's assume the worst," I said. "Full readiness, every available system online. If they're sending everything they have, we need to be ready to meet it." The team moved quickly, checking equipment, reinforcing weak points throughout the outpost, adapting whatever captured technology Oliver's team had managed to study into something usable for whatever confrontation was still ahead of us. Grace continued monitoring communications, gathering every scrap of information that might help us understand exactly what we were about to face. Above us, the remaining ships continued their slow, deliberate repositioning, drawing closer together in a formation that suggested careful coordination rather than a rushed, emotional response. Whatever commander was directing this operation, they were clearly trying to salvage a situation that had already gone far worse than anyone on their side had anticipated. "They're not panicking," Lucy observed, watching the readings closely. "This looks organized." "That makes them more dangerous," I said. "But it also means they're thinking carefully rather than reacting emotionally. That gives us a chance to predict what they'll do next." I looked around at the quiet, focused preparation happening throughout Outpost Solace, every person moving with the same calm determination that had defined this unit since long before any of us arrived here. Whatever confrontation was still ahead, we intended to face it exactly the same way we had faced everything else. With careful preparation and without fear. The remaining ships continued their approach, drawing steadily closer, and I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that always came before something significant. Whatever they intended to bring against us next, we would be ready. We had already proven that twice. We intended to prove it again. The remaining 2 ships held their new formation for nearly an hour before anything changed, and that hour felt longer than almost any I had experienced in my career. Every person at Outpost Solace used that time wisely, reinforcing positions, studying captured equipment, and preparing for whatever decision that alien command structure eventually reached. "They're moving," Lucy finally said, her voice cutting through the quiet tension of the command room. I stepped closer to the display, watching both remaining vessels begin a slow, deliberate descent toward the outpost. Unlike the earlier waves, this time there was no attempt at subtlety, no careful positioning meant to avoid detection. They were coming directly, openly, as if they had abandoned any pretense of this being a quiet, controlled operation. "They're not hiding anymore," Grace said. "They don't need to," I replied. At this point, they probably assume we already know they're coming. The two ships settled into a stable, low-orbit position, and moments later, a much larger deployment began. Multiple dropships released simultaneously, descending toward different points around the outpost's perimeter rather than concentrating on a single entrance. This was no longer a careful investigation. This was a full commitment. "They're surrounding us," Oliver said, watching the deployment pattern. "That's exactly what I expected," I said. "Once pride gets involved, subtlety usually disappears." I moved through the outpost quickly, checking every position, making sure everyone understood the shift in strategy this moment required. With multiple entry points under simultaneous pressure, we could no longer rely on funneling every intruder through a single controlled corridor. This would require a more dynamic response, drawing on tactics we had trained for but rarely needed to use in full. "Everyone listen carefully," I said over the comm, my voice steady, despite the seriousness of the moment. "They're committing everything they have left. This isn't going to be as contained as the last two waves. We adapt, we hold our ground, and we make sure every entry point becomes exactly as costly for them as the first two were." Henry's voice came back immediately, calm despite the tension. "Ready on the north side." Oliver followed. South side secured and waiting. Grace remained at the central monitoring station, continuing to track their communications even as the situation intensified. "Their coordination is tighter this time," she said. "Whoever's leading this assault clearly wants to avoid repeating the same mistakes." "They'll still make mistakes," I said. "They still don't understand what this place really is." The dropships touched down almost simultaneously around the outpost's perimeter, and within moments, multiple entry points came under pressure at once. I moved toward the central corridor, coordinating between teams as reports came in from every direction, adjusting our response in real time as the situation unfolded. "North side engaged," Henry reported, his voice tight with focus but steady. "They're pushing hard, but we're holding." "South side holding as well," Oliver added. "They're better organized than the last two groups, but our position is solid." I moved quickly between stations, offering guidance where needed, trusting my team to handle the details of their individual positions while I focused on the larger picture. This was the moment Outpost Solace had been built for, the reason a group of experienced, highly trained soldiers had been quietly stationed at the edge of nowhere for years, waiting for a threat nobody else believed would ever arrive. "Grace, any updates on their command structure?" I asked, moving past her station. "They're definitely coordinating a fuller effort now," she said. "I'm picking up references to reinforcing their position rather than simply capturing the outpost. I think they've moved past whatever their original goal was. Now it's about proving they can still succeed." "That kind of thinking usually leads to overcommitment," I said, "which works in our favor." The confrontation continued for what felt like a long stretch of controlled, deliberate resistance, each team holding their assigned position while adapting to the shifting pressure of a much larger, more determined force. Unlike the earlier waves, this engagement required patience and careful coordination rather than a single decisive ambush. Slowly, methodically, the tide began to shift. "North side pushing back," Henry reported, "their formations breaking apart." "Same here," Oliver added. "I think they're realizing this isn't the quick victory they expected." I moved toward the central display, watching as the overall picture of the engagement became clearer. Despite committing significantly more force than either of the previous two waves, this larger assault was beginning to falter in exactly the same way the earlier ones had, simply on a larger scale. Confidence built on flawed assumptions rarely survived contact with a genuinely prepared defense, no matter how much force was thrown behind it. "Lucy, what's happening with their remaining ships?" I asked. She checked her readings, her expression shifting towards something between relief and disbelief. "They're not sending anything else," she said. "I think this was everything they had committed to this operation." That was significant. If this larger wave had represented the full extent of their available forces for this assault, then whatever happened in the next few minutes would likely determine the entire outcome of this confrontation. "Everyone hold your positions," I said over the comm. "We're close. Stay focused." The engagement continued for several more tense minutes before the resistance from the intruders began to noticeably weaken across every position simultaneously. Whatever coordination had driven this larger assault forward was beginning to collapse under the same pressure that had defeated the previous two waves, simply requiring more time given the larger scale. "North side secured," Henry finally reported, his voice carrying clear relief despite his usual steady tone. "South side secured as well," Oliver added moments later. "I think that's everything." I moved through the outpost quickly, confirming each position, checking on every member of my team, making sure the relief in their voices matched what I was seeing throughout the entire structure. Slowly, the tension that had gripped Outpost Solace for the past several hours began to ease, replaced by the quiet, careful process of securing the aftermath. "Grace, what's the situation with their remaining ships?" I asked, finding her still at her station, monitoring communications closely. "They're not moving," she said. "I think they're trying to figure out what happened. Whatever confidence brought them here in the first place, I don't think it's there anymore." I looked toward the viewport, watching the two remaining vessels hang motionless in orbit, their earlier aggressive posture replaced by something that looked distinctly like hesitation. Whatever commander was directing this operation now faced the reality of 3 failed attempts against a target their own scanning systems had promised would offer no real resistance at all. "Keep monitoring them," I said. "I want to know the moment they decide to leave, or the moment they decide to do something else entirely." Hours passed slowly after that, filled with the careful, methodical work of securing captured intruders, gathering additional information, and reinforcing every position throughout the outpost in case this quiet standoff shifted into something else. Grace continued extracting fragments of translated communication, piecing together a clearer picture of exactly what had brought this alien force to Outpost Solace in the first place. "I think I understand now," she finally said, gathering the team together near the central display. Their scanning systems flagged this location as a low-value target, based purely on external appearance and minimal energy signatures. They had no idea what was actually inside. "That was the entire point of this place," I said. "Hidden in plain sight, exactly the way it was designed. They're going to remember this," Henry said. "I don't think any commander who survives this is going to trust an easy scan again." I found myself agreeing with that completely. Whatever confidence this alien species carried into their operations, whatever pattern of easy victories had shaped their approach to conflicts across whatever territory they controlled, that pattern had just been broken in a way none of them would soon forget. Eventually, the 2 remaining ships began a slow, careful retreat, pulling away from orbit without any further attempt at engagement. Grace monitored their departure closely, tracking fragments of communication that suggested confusion and reluctant acceptance of a failed operation rather than any plan for immediate retaliation. "They're leaving," Lucy confirmed, watching the readings shift toward confirmation of their departure, definitely retreating. A quiet, collective relief settled over the command room, the kind of feeling that came only after a genuinely uncertain confrontation resolved in your favor. I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe, looking around at the team who had spent years training quietly at the edge of known space for exactly this kind of moment. Not long after their retreat, our own reinforcements finally arrived, alerted by delayed distress signals that had taken time to reach anyone capable of responding. I watched from the observation deck as several official vessels approached Outpost Solace, their arrival carrying an unmistakable sense of surprise once they realized exactly what had happened here. A senior officer named Nathan Price came aboard personally, his expression carrying a mixture of relief and quiet embarrassment as he took in the scale of what our small, forgotten outpost had accomplished without any outside assistance. "We had no idea the situation here was this serious," he said, looking around at the aftermath still being carefully documented throughout the corridors. "If we had known, we would have responded immediately." "That was rather the point of this place," I said. "Nobody was supposed to know how serious it actually was." He studied me for a long moment, clearly processing the reality that a posting his own command had likely considered irrelevant had just handled a genuine alien incursion without a single serious casualty. "I'll be filing a full report on this," he said. "Command is going to want a complete account." "I imagine they will," I said. Over the following days, additional officials arrived to study the captured equipment, interview the restrained intruders further, and begin the slow process of understanding exactly what species had attempted this operation and why. Grace's careful translation work became invaluable during that process, providing insight that would likely shape how future encounters with this same species were handled. I spent much of that time simply checking on my team, making sure everyone recovered properly from the tension of the past several days, grateful beyond words that our preparation had proven sufficient against a threat none of us had specifically anticipated, but all of us had trained for regardless. Lucy found me on the observation deck one quiet evening, the same window where I had first watched those 3 alien ships arrive. "Word's already spreading," she said. "Apparently their retreating ships transmitted something back through their networks. A warning, according to what our translation teams picked up. Something about never underestimating locations that appear undefended." I considered that for a long moment, looking out at the quiet stars beyond the viewport. "Good," I said. "Let that warning spread as far as it needs to." "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe," I said honestly. "But if they do, they won't make the same mistake twice, and neither will we." She nodded, understanding exactly what that meant. Outpost Solace had been built specifically because someone, somewhere, understood that the most dangerous threats rarely announce themselves clearly in advance. Sometimes the most important defenses were the ones nobody was ever meant to notice. As the days passed and Outpost Solace slowly returned to its usual quiet rhythm, I found myself reflecting often on everything that had happened. An alien force had arrived expecting an easy, forgotten target, only to discover they had stumbled directly into one of the most carefully prepared defensive positions in existence, hidden deliberately behind an appearance of complete insignificance. The very reason this outpost had seemed like such an unremarkable posting was the exact reason it had succeeded so completely against a threat nobody else even knew to expect. Grace continued her work identifying more about the species we had encountered, slowly building a clearer picture that would likely prove valuable for a long time to come. Henry and Oliver focused on studying whatever technology we had managed to recover, adapting useful elements into our own systems wherever possible. Lucy remained diligent at her monitoring station, watching for any sign that this encounter might not be entirely finished. As for me, I returned to the same quiet routine that had defined my time at Outpost Solace before everything changed so suddenly, though I carried with me now a deeper understanding of exactly why this place existed and exactly why it mattered so much, despite how insignificant it appeared to the rest of the galaxy. Somewhere out among the stars, word of what happened here was spreading slowly through channels I would likely never fully understand, carrying with it a simple, unmistakable message to anyone who might consider this quiet corner of space an easy target in the future. Some places are exactly what they appear to be, and some are far more than anyone could ever imagine. Outpost Solace remained exactly where it always had, quiet, unremarkable, and utterly unprepared to be underestimated ever again.